right, surviving 40 years of narcissistic abuse. So I want to make this video and share with you today my experience of experiencing 40 years of narcissistic abuse from, basically an infant all the way up to my young adulthood. And I'm currently 44 making this video, so it's been about 4 years that the narcissist hasn't had access to me, which has been great. But, really, I want to make this video, to help you or anyone you might know that might be experiencing narcissistic abuse and it completely ruining their life, because I had a few key people throughout my adulthood that, said a few pieces of advice to me that really helped me, and I was able to internalize those and then ultimately overcome this narcissistic abuse cycle that I was stuck in for so long. So anyway, my narcissistic abuser is my mother, and it started out for me when I was first born. So she was convinced that she was going to have a girl named Jasmine Marie, and when I came out, it was kind of the biggest detriment of her life. And every single birthday I've ever had, up until my 40th, when I stopped contact with her, was a reminder that I'm not Jasmine Marie. And so I experienced that for every birthday. She'd always tell the story about how when I was born, she was so disappointed. Which is, pretty sad and lame. So anyway, my parents were kind of part of that back to land movement of the 70s and 80s with the new age, overtaking society. And I was raised in Oregon, West Coast USA. And, there were those new age type people where, kind of any behavior goes. And of course, narcissistic abuse on people is tolerated because the new age movement really, terrible behavior is okay, and it's all live in the moment, be here now, and everything's great. So, as a baby, it was just kind of like neglect, rather than, she always would tell a story about when I was an infant and crying because I had a dirty diaper. Rather than changing my diaper, she would just put 3 diapers on me. She called it the triple diaper, and then I could just go through the night and she wouldn't have to get up and change my diaper. Another thing she would do was, I remember she tells a story about I had cradle cap, which is kind of like a skin irritation babies get on their heads. And it got so bad that the cradle cap came down and covered my forehead and started to get into my eyes. And so, it's just like neglect of a child that these narcissistic people do, and then somehow justify that it's okay. It's just terrible. Another thing she would do is she would hover over me when maybe she was changing my diaper, just holding me, and she would say this thing, "Why can't you be Jasmine? Why can't you be Jasmine?" And that is just burned into my psyche. I don't know how many times she did it, but I hate hearing that, and that was another weird thing she would do. So anyway, that was just being a baby. But then when I started to become a little kid, I remember my brother was born when I was around 4. I was 4 years old, and I remember really wanting to be friends with him and really liking him and us bonding when he was a baby. But unbeknownst to me, my narcissistic mother was really plotting to just have a lot of friction between my brother and I. And that really resulted in me not liking my brother, because he kind of became elevated to this golden child of the family. And I was this scapegoat. Everything was my fault. I was always in trouble. I was always being mean to him. And for years we've been at odds, and we're still at odds to this day. She's managed to get back in there and create turmoil within the relationship of our family, which is just a common thing narcissist mothers do. So anyway, the only way I would get attention from her was just being bad. I I'd either have to be really bad or really good. So, being really bad, I would just cause trouble, be mean to my brother, all that. I would get a lot of attention, but it was always negative, but at least it was attention from her and my dad. Then I'd have to be really, really good. And so I did that in sports. I excelled in soccer, baseball, football, all that. I was really good. I tried really hard. And it was cool, but ultimately it was just for the attention of the narcissistic mother. And really with her, it was always this hot and cold. She either would really like me or she would really hate me. There was no just even middle ground of acceptance and love. It was always, she'd give me a little bit and then take it right back away. And it was this weird whiplash roller coaster of trying to get her affection and love. And so what it resulted with, that I'm feel terrible about, is really I was just a mean kid, and I'd always be putting other people down, and I was mean to other kids, and I'd made fun of kids, and I wasn't a bully because I wasn't big and I couldn't physically dominate people, but I could mentally dominate people. I could really find the things that made them insecure and then embellish those and make fun of them, and then tormenting other people made me feel better because I was so insecure, and really I was really depressed as a child, and I didn't know my place, and I couldn't relate to people. It was very challenging to have healthy relationships, and it was kind of the beginning of attracting other narcissistic people to me. I feel like people who are narcissistically abused become prey for other narcissists, and then that became a theme throughout my life, up until basically I rejected my narcissistic mother and started understanding and healing from this, that I could understand other narcissistic people coming at me to suck my energy. So anyway, being a kid, I was just really mean. I still was really good at sports, so it was that weird duality. And then so teenage years were a lot of confusion. Obviously I couldn't relate to women because the first woman I had to relate to was a narcissist, and it completely screwed me up. It was challenging to relate to other men because my dad, in the dynamic, and I'll go deeper into this in another video, is a narcissist abuse victim himself, and he is trauma bonded to my mom. That's how he found her. He trauma bonded to her. I'll talk more about that in another video. But anyway, it was kind of like there was no help from him because he's been in this emotional prison his whole life. So it was challenging to relate to other people. And certainly teenager is already a very challenging age to be. And I was just trying to navigate that the best I could, which I found smoking marijuana, and that alleviated a lot of stress and a lot of pressure that I was experiencing as a teenager, which was good because it did mellow me out and calm me down. I wasn't so aggressive and mean, and I kind of just internalized everything. But it is ultimately detrimental because rather than understanding and figuring out how to cope with my problems, I just turned to escapism, which is the main thing that I think everyone does in society, because there's no healthy way to cope with all these problems that we're experiencing, And so escapism is there for you, and it was there for me. And so I started smoking weed when I was about 15, and I quit sports, and I just started skateboarding and snowboarding, which was fine, and I just kind of internalized everything, and went on this mission of trying to understand myself by just smoking weed and doing my own thing. And so I was calmer. I wasn't really destroying other people's lives, which I was before, as a child, when I was really mean to everybody. So I was relatively contained, but the narcissistic abuse was still happening from my mom, and it was still very confusing, and I was very depressed. So eventually, I moved out, and then I began my young adulthood, and I was trying to find my way and really, have have girlfriends and relate to women in a positive way. And I would just attract other narcissists, narcissistic women, whether they were kind of mildly narcissist or extreme narcissist. You know, they still had personality problems, and they, you know, did mean things and didn't behave well. And, you know, that resulted in a lot of challenges just trying to relate to people on a healthy level. And of course, my narcissistic mother was very involved in every relationship I've ever been in, whether it's friends that were guys or girlfriends. And yeah, so it was never really anything meaningful as far as these girlfriends went. They were experiences, and I'm glad that they happened and everything was fine. But in the end, I was still smoking weed constantly, and I was just doing escapism. And so I had turned to music. I taught myself how to play music, and I started being in bands. I was a performer and a singer, and I played country and bluegrass, and it was a lot of fun. But what's really interesting about that was it's like everything that was successful in my life, my narcissistic mother kind of like took as her own success, which is really bizarre. So she was always praising my success as a success of her own. I remember she did this weird thing where she like wrote into this publication about who's the best singer where I live, and I think she just petitioned this paper a time to say I was the best singer, and then she brought me this article about how I'm the best, and she was like, "Look, you're the best." I was like, "Yeah, okay, well, really wasn't that good." So that was weird. But, so what ended up happening was, she's just meddling in my life constantly. I'm constantly escaping. And then it just put me in these relationships with these terrible people who treated me poorly. And I wasn't really present for it because I was just escaping them constantly. And it was all this turmoil for years. And what ended up happening was, so this is when I'm in my 30s, in my adulthood. And I've kind of had lived this life. I remember this one guy told me, he's like, it's like you're in third gear. You're going, and you kind of have momentum, but you're never, in fourth or fifth gear when you're really cruising. So I was in this state of just, just cruising along and nothing really happening. And I could never get what it felt was like a foothold on life. You know what I mean? When you get that foothold, and then you can just start to, do well. I could never get that. And I think what was happening was my mom was just eroding with this abuse, this mental and psychological abuse constantly, and it was hard to just to get a hold of anything. So what ended up happening was, it resulted, I was in this relationship with this girl, and I knew it was wrong, and I broke up with her about, after about 6 months, if things really aren't working well. And so I broke up with her, and then, man, my mom just hammered me for weeks until I got back with this girl. So I did, and the result was kind of like a big life change. I had to move out of the house I was in and kind of change my life to be with her. And it resulted in me just being really depressed. And then I started drinking a ton. And that's when things get really dangerous for people experiencing emotional and psychological abuse. Because alcohol, it's one thing smoking weed, because it kind of keeps you contained. You're still escaping and not processing your problems. But once you start drinking, that's when it gets dark and really dangerous. So I fell into this trap of drinking and driving. I got a DUI. And that didn't stop me, from drinking and driving, which is really dangerous. If you look at the statistics of alcohol-related deaths, they're astronomical. People are constantly dying from accidents related to alcohol. And I would drink, I would start at like 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and drink all day. And then I became friends with my neighbor, and I was living out on this ranch where my girlfriend's parents bought it. And anyway, stuck us out there. And we were living there, and I became friends with my neighbor, who was another rancher guy, and he made all this moose And so I just go over there and get blackout drunk on this whiskey moonshine he made. And I remember I used to drive my tractor home blackout drunk from his house to my house, which was like down this kind of highway stretch and then off. And it was so dangerous and terrible. And the girl I was with, was experiencing that because of my, becoming an alcoholic and being all depressed. And, the relationship was weird. She was it was like a weird dad situation. She was kind of like a child, even though she was in her 30s. And anyway, I was so unhappy and depressed, and it was reaching a head. And this was really the dark place that narcissistic abuse takes people to. When you're so depressed, you want to escape your life, you're drinking constantly, there's no way out. And I was so close to dying, putting myself in a situation where I would lose my life. And drinking and driving does that to you every second. You choose to do that. So right at that time, a few key events happened. Number one, I had this dream where I was observing myself in the third person of like the drinking and driving and how I was behaving in this relationship. And it gave me this insight, and I felt so bad for myself that I had this different perspective, and I wanted to change. And then I got this piece of advice from a friend of mine. We went on this big drive. I went and bought a tractor up in Idaho, and it was like a 13-hour drive. My friend went with me, and his mom's a narcissist, but he's an alcoholic to this day. I don't think he's processed, coped, recovered, whatever. He was telling me, just forget your mom, because I was telling him, man, she's just on me, she's calling me constantly, she's micromanaging my life, this is terrible. And he said, forget her. I just stopped talking to my mom and cut her off. And so I did that to my mom, and I had no idea that she's a narcissistic abuser. All I know that she was just like an irritant in my life. So I cut her and my dad and my brother off my family. I just stopped talking to them. I did this for 1 year. In that year, my life completely changed. It did a 180-degree turn. I was depressed, alcoholic, third gear, pretty much a loser, not doing anything. And boom, I stopped smoking weed. I stopped drinking alcohol. I had this renew on life. I had this like power and this sense of control, because I cut those people out for a year, and I stopped smoking weed, I stopped drinking alcohol, I started my own business, which I do forestry and excavation, and I've done that for like almost 20 years now. I met my now wife. I met her at a bar. I went to hear some music. I stopped drinking, but I'd still go out and socialize and have a good time. I mean, you can still do that. You don't have to drink at these bars. You can just go and interact with people and have a great time, and then have like a $5 bar tab at the end of the night. And then in that time, I just experienced this massive amount of personal growth, and I just got control of my life, and I accomplished so much, and I was moving forward, and it was like this whole new thing. And I split up with that girl, obviously. That wasn't working, so I had to get out of that. But the one thing that remained the constant was the narcissistic abuse from my mother. So I cut her off for a year, and everything was great. But then, eventually I let them all back in, my mom, my brother, and my dad. And then it just kicked right back up, and I had no idea that this was happening. But I had something that I hadn't had before. And so I met my wife during that year of no contact with the narcissist. And what's interesting about my wife is she grew up in a narcissistic household. Her sister is a narcissist. And within these narcissistic families and relationships and dynamics, people fall into certain roles. And this is what I've learned just from understanding narcissism. So like my role in my family, I was the scapegoat. My brother was a golden child. My dad, he was the enabler. These are roles that happen. Another role in a narcissistic dynamic relationship is a seer, and that's someone who sees what the narcissist does and understands that, maybe they don't understand narcissism by its, definition, but they see that something's off and they understand this isn't right. And that's exactly what my wife is. She's a seer. And when she met me and observed the dynamic between my family and myself, because I introduced her to my family, on literally the day I started talking to them again. I told her the situation, that, hey, I cut my family off for a year, I had to do some personal growth, I was having problems, and so I'm going to introduce you to them, and this is the situation. I explained that to her, so instantly that was a flag for her, a red flag of like, okay, this is weird. But then, over the years, so she observed that. We got together when I was 33, 34, so we've been together 10 years. But from 34 till about 40, she observed the weird dynamic there between my mom and myself. And she, anytime she would kind of mention it, it would trigger me because I get triggered so easily because of, all that psychological torment that I experienced. So she was real delicate in how she would approach me with what she saw. But anyway, so she was reading this article about narcissism because it's so popular now, because it's just basically destroying society. And she said, hey, because I was trying to, so the situation we ended up in was we had to move out of the house we were living in to downsize just because everything got so expensive. And so my parents bought this property and they have a guest house there. And before I understood that my mom was a narcissist, I kind of romanticized moving my wife, and we had our daughter at the time, moving my family into the guest house at my parents' property, and how fun that would be, and it'd be so fun to experience. They could be grandparents, and my wife and I and our child were going to have another kid too, could all live together, it'd be this amazing thing. But little did I know, that was, that's not the case. Narcissists hate children, and anyway, that's the situation. But so we're at my parents' place, living in the guest house now, and I'm still just like a dog on a chain to my narcissistic mother. These ups and downs of depression, but so much positivity in my life with being married and starting my family. And it was a strange, thing happening where I was so happy but so sad at the same time. So eventually she reads this article about narcissism, because I'm trying to figure out, like, I'm more aware that something's up with my mom. I didn't understand narcissism at the time. I was more looking into like personality disorders, because it kind of came to the point where she had full-time access to me, and she was just doing these weird things, man, like these weird psychological things that would make me so depressed. And I finally confronted her and said, like, what is going on? Why do you keep doing this to me? I don't understand. Like, what did I do? And of course, she just played the victim. You can't really reason with narcissists, because they're just constantly the victim, and everyone's against them. Oh, it's all so terrible. So she just played the victim card, and then basically turned it around and put everything on me. So that wasn't fruitful at all. So then eventually I was just trying to understand her, and I was thinking, oh, she has personality disorders. And I was kind of using the psychology approach of diagnosing, this poor person and their problems and their trauma has turned them into this kind of person. Which it does give you understanding, but it's not really accurate, because these people, at the end of the day, are just behaving terribly, and it's a huge detriment on society, and they need to be held accountable for their actions. That's really it, at the end of the day. If you can't treat people with dignity and respect, then you need to be subjugated and have a less impact and involvement in society. And people who can treat people well with respect and dignity need to be elevated within society. That's what I feel. So anyway, I'm trying to diagnose my mom, with her personality disorders, and my wife says this narcissist thing came across, in the Apple News feed. It kind of sends out these little things, and she's like, you ought to check this out, because it sounds a lot like what you're experiencing and then what your mom's doing. So I dove into that 100%. And I was trying to understand, like, what is going on. Boom. That was it, man. What she did checked all the boxes. And so that was when I was 40. I got enlightened to what this narcissist thing is, and these people who are narcissists, and the effects it had on me and people around me. And I could reflect on all these experiences that I had from childhood into teenage years to my adulthood, and it gave me so much understanding of, like, this woman and just this relentless mission she was on to just, derail my life, suck my vital life energy. All the weird, relationship issues she had throughout her life, the strange dynamic between her and my dad, my brother being the golden child, basically can do no wrong. And so what I did was, boom, I cut her off. So she has limited access to me. So we live on the same property. Their house is like 50 feet from our house. And I have cut her off. I said, listen, if you can't be respectful and treat me with dignity, then I don't want to have to communicate with you. There's no communication. So now she does these weird things where she's either really exuberant when she sees me and waves, hi, or she does this thing where she's so sad and everything's so terrible when she sees me. So that's her only thing she can have with me, is me visually seeing her, which still triggers me, and she knows that. But, really, I'm in this gray area. I've kind of mastered the gray mode with the narcissist, and that's something you can do if you cut these people off. You can either cut them off 100%, never see them or speak to them again, which really that's the best. Or if you have to communicate with them to some degree, you kind of put them in this gray mode. So I have to see her now as basically an insane child. That's how I reason her behavior in my mind. But the situation is this, and I'm going to wrap the video up because it's more about my experience and my surviving of this 40 years of narcissistic abuse. And really, 40 years sounds like a long time, but for most people, it's a lifetime of narcissistic abuse because they never get out of it. And, I want to be that voice for you and people, around you that just need a little bit, just plant that seed to get them out of that narcissistic spell that they're under, because that's what it is. It's a spell. They mind fuck you, and you just get so confused about right and wrong, up, down, the whole thing. So the current status is she's in the gray zone. We're living on their property. My parents are aging out. They're boomers. And she's a narcissist in collapse. So a narcissist in collapse is they've lost all their supply. So the main thing these narcissists want is supply, which is just energy. They just suck people's energy. I was my mom's main blood energy boy for my whole life. So 4 years ago, once I cut her off, boom, she has lost her major supply. All of her friends have completely abandoned her because she does not know how to have healthy relationships. She has one friend that comes over, but she only comes around because she just wants something from my parents. That's it. Otherwise, she's completely alone. She has my dad in this weird thing where he's like her little pet. And, he's her enabler. He kind of justifies her behavior. And oh yeah, your mother. And every once in a while, things will blow up. Like recently, I have to give my mom all this love, or else they're going to kick us out. My wife and I have 2 kids now. My daughter's 6 and my other daughter is 2. So they're going to kick us out because I don't love my mom enough. Which is, okay, weird. But, so she's in full collapse. She just treats my dad, like this little lap dog. He's on a chain. He's super depressed. He just wants to escape his life. And then I'll talk about this more, but now, so her only supply, she's targeted my daughter now. she's been targeting my daughter since she was like 3 or 4 when she could start talking. And she does the same thing to my daughter that she did to me with this hot and cold. Like, oh, I love you so much. Come and play with me. Or no, I don't love you at all. Get away from me. She does these weird things where she'll like see my wife and kid and then she hides. And my wife's always like, yeah, I saw your mom. And she was like hiding behind her car to like not see us. Anyway, strange behavior. But like I said, I want to be a voice of reason to you or anyone you might know. And I'm just going to wrap this up. That was basically it. I wanted to share my story. And hopefully this can give some insight. Anyway, appreciate you watching. And I'm just going to continue, sharing what I've learned about all this. Okay, thank you.